Look, Tom, there they are. 5 minutes later. We got this guy. Did you see where the other fellow went?
Oh, where am I? What happened to me? I feel as if I just had a horrible nightmare.
Come, Catherine, relax.
You say you found a spy nest at 104 South Slip. Who's talking? Hey, he's hung up.
Welcome to Cosmic Comics, Games and Collectibles, your zen of geekism. We carry comics old and new, magazines, toys, games like Pokemon, Magic, D&D. Want Godzilla, Ultraman, Star Trek, Ninja Turtles, Funko Pops? You'll find it all here. Shop our Cosmic Sound Room and pick up a record or two. Enjoy our Comic Coffee Lounge with a cup of Sasquatch coffee while geeking out over a super cool movie on our big screen. Cosmic Comic, Games and Collectibles. Superman loves us, and so will you.
Hi everyone, Jason Hunt here, inviting you to join us every Saturday morning for news, the week's headlines in science fiction, fantasy, horror, comic books, video games, plus Comic-Con updates and the weather, and the occasional interview along the way. We call it Good Morning Multiverse. We hope you join us every Saturday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern, 10 Central, right here on Sci-Fi for Me TV.
Good evening, everybody. I am RJ Carter, Senior Managing Editor here at CriticalBlast.com, Chief Envelope Licker for Critical Blast Logistics, Myopic Proofreader for Critical Blast Publishing, and I will help you with your data needs as they arise, putting my 35 years of database design experience to your benefit with your crowdfunded data. Tonight, well, it's actually afternoon for me. Top secret, this is being pre-recorded to run on a Friday, because we are talking with Mr. Mike Walters, the face behind the mic stand. If you haven't subscribed to the mic stand, do hit the link below the video here. It will be there, and it will take you to his channel, and it will allow you to subscribe so that you can get Monday through Thursday the best of the niche news in comics, manga, anime, and pro wrestling. Yeah, they go together. I'm not figuring it out myself, but I see it all over the place, so I know it happens. But on Fridays, which is the topic of our show tonight, Mike does the comic book retrospective, wherein he takes you through the Wayback Machine into the golden age of comics, and we read them. Literally, on the screen, read them, do voices. We have guest hosts. He has guest hosts. It's not my channel. Sometimes I am the guest host, so I can say we. It's a lot of fun. It's an educational experience, and I think you would really have a lot of fun there. But to learn more about it and why it exists, let us bring on the man himself, the one, the only, the living legend, Mr. Mike Walters.
Nice intro. Let me do a couple quick comments on what I saw in the intro, your intro there. The very first thing that popped up on your promo screen reminded me of the Merry Melodies header.
Yeah, well, that's one of my backgrounds. I like that. It's in fact, it is the Merry Melodies header, and then I just put my circle in the middle of their circle, and
right
now it's a whole new image.
Yeah, well, hopefully you don't get in trouble for that.
Oh no. It's art. It's not their logo. I think they're fine with it.
Yeah.
If not, I'll do a color shift on it, and then what will they say?
Yeah.
Won't be the same.
So let's see. How are we gonna do this? Okay.
Well, let's talk about why, because you got into comic books not through comics. You got into them through the Saturday morning cartoons when you were a kid. So that's what your introduction was to a lot of these characters.
Yeah. Of course, as you know, I grew up watching Super Friends, and as I got older, I would watch many of the. As I got older, I'd go back and watch, when they were syndicated, some of the older stuff, like the stuff from, Filmation, the Fleischer Studio Superman cartoons, and
good stuff.
When we got into the 90s, get into Batman. Now, when I started, of course, when you get in the 90s and you get into the birth of the DCAU, I was realizing, these were, I knew I knew a lot of these characters, but they were different from what I grew up with. And then as I, obviously as I got older and I learned a little bit more, I realized, hey, there were some different worlds here. There's you had like pre-crisis, post-crisis, all this different stuff. And I'm sure that whether you got your start with cartoons or even comics, when you get into it, when you get into something, right? When you get into something, when you get really immersed into it, and you really get into it, I'm sure everybody's probably had it at some point where there's that one part of you that kind of wishes, hey, I'd like to hang out with Superman, or I'd like to hang out with Batman, or I'd like to hang out with Spider-Man, or wouldn't it be cool to hang out with with Archie and his gang, or wouldn't it be cool to hang out with Richie Rich?
Yeah, that's why people ship. They're like, oh, I know what the book says, but I really think this person and this person, they should hook up, because you form these personal relationships with these fictional characters.
Yeah, and it's like you make that, and that's where you make the connections, right? Well, back about 10, 15 years ago or so, I decided to, look more into the comics. I mean, I know the DCAU, that's one variation of the universe. We've seen the DCEU, we've seen, and then as I looked deeper and deeper into the DC's multiverse, I saw, there was Earth 2, Earth 1, Earth 3, and I learned, now, as some people may know, I'm on the spectrum. That's one of my diagnoses. I'm on the spectrum, and one of the things about that is when you get into something, you really get into it.
Yeah,
you really get into it, and
you've got to put it in order and in sequence and make sense out of it.
Right.
Index.
And that's pretty much what I did. When I started looking into like the comic side of it, and I started, now initially, of course, my focus was on DC, because Super Friends is probably one of my favorite cartoons. Not to say that I didn't watch the Marvel comic cartoons and all that. In fact, one of the things I was thinking about earlier today was going back to my point about the idea of being immersed into something and like wishing you could interact with with whoever your favorite comic character is. Remind me of the Spider-Man the Animated series episode Make a Wish. It was, I think, part 2 of the second story arc in the series, not the first season, but the second season. It was the one where there was it was the one where okay, so this is the arc where Madam Web started kind of mentoring Spider-Man.
Okay.
And it was a thing. The second episode, it was a second and third episode involved this little girl named Taina, who was terminally ill. She, but she through a kind of a Make-A-Wish Foundation kind of thing, she got a letter to the Bugle, and she wanted to meet Spider-Man. And they spent the 2 episodes there, where he came to visit her. It was kind of like the lesson that Madam Web was trying to teach him was to have the faith of a child. That was the whole, and then there was a thing where, Dr. Octopus got involved, and, I don't know if you
Oh, yeah.
that episode or if you remember that episode, if anybody.
I barely remember it. I'm sure I watched it because if it was a superhero cartoon on in the 70s and 80s, I was there.
Well, this one was in the 90s. This was the Spider-Man animated episode from the one that ran from I think 94 to 98 or something like that.
I think I actually had those on DVD, but I watched through them like in a speed run to review them, and I didn't take the time to really enjoy them.
Well, it was the one where Christopher Daniel Barnes voiced Spider-Man. Dr. Octopus was voiced by Efren Zimbalist Jr., who voiced Alfred in Batman the Animated Series.
That's where I know that name from.
Yeah. Huh?
That's where I know that name from was from Batman.
Yeah. So, but anyway, so, it's to a lot of that point. Let's see, now I've lost my train of thought here. So we're talking about why I did this.
Yes.
Well, okay. So initially I started back. When I started it, I initially did it for myself to DC and all the properties that DC would pick up over the years, like Quality, Fawcett, Sharp, granted, I would, and as you pointed out, I'd start all the way back to the very beginning. Like,
yeah, I mean, a lot of people
1935 with New Fun #1. Okay?
Yeah, a lot of people will go find like, key or milestone issues and say, okay, to understand this character, I'll just read this story and this story, and that'll give me a basic understanding. You went back to the foundations. Where like, okay, we're digging up the dirt and we're laying the groundwork for the comics industry. You started there, which isn't something that a lot of people do.
Well, yeah, because I mean, if part of it is about making connections, right? You want to know these people. You want to know what their lives are like, right? I'm not saying that I'm not necessarily saying that everybody wants, as is happening today, unfortunately, nobody, we don't need an overdose of a person's, personal or sexual life. Okay.
Yeah.
But, just having, just the normal day-to-day activities, just the kind of thing of just hanging out with them, being around them because, of the positive contributions they make to the world, that at the very core of my channel, with all my coverage, that's what it comes back to. It's about bringing positivity to a landscape that unfortunately has so many people just pushing a lot of negative stuff. It's like
desperately
looky-loo culture. Yeah, I mean, again, I just pointed that out, but don't want to get too deep into that. But the main reason for the historical aspect is a lot of it's having to do with wanting to help people become immersed in the characters they grew up with, in some way, even in some ways, helping some people to rediscover what got them into comics in the first place. I mean, we've been talking a lot the last 2 or 3 years about how comics have changed and how a lot of the agenda pushing is really pushing a lot of, like, particularly older comic fans and older niche fans away from the genres because they don't want to be preached to.
Right.
Now, and we've talked too about the 2 different avenues that people have gone about getting away from that. The one that you cover a lot, and I know like Pops does too, is the idea of the indie comic, just make your own comics and make your own universe. That's one avenue that started with. I'm going down another avenue. I'm going back to the idea of what made us fall in love with these worlds in the first place. What captured our attention in the first place to, to make us fall in love with these characters, whether it's the cartoons, like for me, Superman and and all the DC related, the Super Friends and all that, or whether it's people like yourself who grew up reading the comics, And I get the impression you were about to ask me something again, so
no, I was just taking a tangent off of some things you said, but one of the things that you do, looking at the past, is you'll point out how things have changed. There'll be like a line of dialogue which will be catchy or clever, or just basically something that's out of the ordinary that you wouldn't see written today.
Right. Well, word usage, language usage, comparative social commentary. Those are some of the more commentary aspects of my channel. Because again, now as you pointed out, yes, we reread the stories. We do read the stories, and we do the voices because, again, the immersion aspect of it. I want, when people are watching, I want, as the song goes, I want to take them there.
Yeah, I get you.
I want to take. I want when you come and you whether it's you and me, or the Tomoloviches and myself, or Rick Piper, or Tim Olson, or whoever is co-hosting with me that week, or even when Batgo was still with me. Ultimately, what I want when people come watch the historical, one of the things I want them to take away from it is that they were able to take a little break from the real world. I want to help them recapture that sense of escapism, even if it is only for an hour and a half, 2 hours a week. Don't think about all the woke garbage. Don't think about all the things going on in the world today. Let's go back in time to when things were simpler, things were more positive, things were happier. We enjoyed ourselves more. We weren't at each other's throats, because of all the garbage in the world. I want it to be a more positive experience. I want people to, be able to go back and even if it is for just a moment, to relive those times that, that they were a lot happier, a lot more positive.
Yeah. And it's more than just a straight read through of a book or several stories, because you can read more than one story in the time span you've got allotted for the show. But we'll stop at the bottom of the page, and we'll actually like we're reading to kids, or like we are kids reading, say, what do you think's going to happen when we turn the page here?
Yes,
it's like,
yes, and I do that quite a bit too. That's one of the things I try to do too. And again, that's the immersion aspect of it. That's getting you into that world, right? That's furthering. I mean, one of the things I mentioned before is, what would you do if Access, and for those of you who don't know, Access was a DC and Marvel character. Initially, he was just the gateway between DC and Marvel. But I often argue the point that he theoretically could be the gateway to any comics universe you want. And if, what would you do if he came up to you and gave you the chance to venture into any comics universe you wanted? Which one would you go to?
Yeah.
So
you're visiting all of them, but like you said, you are visiting with a DC bent in mind. So you're going through a lot of the ones that eventually became acquired by DC. The quality.
Well, that was originally what I did. That was when I was just doing it for myself.
Okay.
That's when when I was doing it for myself, then yes, I was focusing more on DC because that was my thing. Now, how we got to the point where I'm going through all of them was so during, this is before I started doing the historical comic retrospective. One day I had trouble finding news stories to cover. Right, I had a little trouble finding. There didn't seem to be a whole lot. So okay, well, what was I going to do? So I decided that day, it happened to be a Wednesday, I believe. I decided to focus, since I was just thinking about like Superman for some reason. I don't even remember why. I decided to go back and look at maybe not Superman, but some of the other works from Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, because they were a very prolific duo back there in the 30s. I mean, yes, everybody knows their work for Superman.
Yeah.
But if you think about it, they were publishing like something like 5 books or 5 features across 4 books. Okay, some of the other works,
Dr. Occult, Funny Man, Slam Bradley, they were.
Yeah, I was just about to go through that. Yeah, Slam Bradley, Bart Regan, Steve Cannon and the Federal Men, Radio Squad, even the very early stories of Dr. Occult, you know, Henri Duval. They were usually running like five books or 5 features across 4 books, you know. And for that time period, because they didn't have internet, they couldn't just email their scripts to whoever, you know. That was, you know, you think about it, 5 features across 4 books, and you know, you were probably doing what, 30 to 40 pages in total there?
Oh, at least, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, that, you know, so I decided, you know, and then, you know, I would, you know, give a little bit of the history of who they were and stuff, and then I decided to read a sample. So I read, you know, Slam Bradley's first story, you know, from Detective Comics #1, which is from 1937. And my audience really got into it. They really got into Slam. And I figured,
onto something.
Exactly. It was like, you know, and then I realized early on, though, that, of course, not everybody, you know, if I was going to do this and I was going to do it for everybody, then I would have to hit, you know, all the interest. You know, it's like, you know, granted, just because I'm into DC doesn't necessarily mean everybody else is going to be. Like, you and I are probably, DC's our company. Yeah, but there are people who probably feel just as passionate about like Marvel or Archie or Harvey Toons or whatever, you know, Harvey Comics or, you know, whatever. I mean, there have been a number of different comics, you know, and genres that have come across over the history there, you know.
Yeah.
Now,
so where did you start then when you said, okay, this is a real thing, we're really going to do this, I've done my little test run, people liked it? Do you remember which comic it was that you said this is the official first comic book retrospective?
Well, if you'll allow me to share some stuff here, I can show you exactly. So
yeah, bring it up on the screen here. While you're bringing that up, since you've had an opportunity to read a bunch of these throughout the shows, have you developed any new old favorite characters that you're like, oh, this week we get to read this character, yay, I love this character?
Well, I don't know if I have any particular favorites myself, but I know like some of the characters that that I have done, and I have it shared now. So
there we are. Oh, I'm gonna take this down. That's
yeah.
Okay. It'll work better that way.
And then what I'm gonna also do, now this is my okay. So okay, gotta get myself organized here. Let me first finish answering your. So ask the last question you just asked me again.
Have you had any developed any favorites of the characters now that you've started reading these older characters?
Maybe not as much my own personal favorites. There are some characters that have become somewhat popular among, you know, those who are watching, like the Clock, for example. The Clock is somebody we talk a lot about because of the whole Captain Napkin Face thing.
Yes, the Clock is one of my favorites too. I love when we do a Clock issue.
Yeah, and also, you know, one of the things I do, since this is more of a generalized history we're covering, there's more of a generalized history we're covering. You know, I do try to mix things up. I do try to do, you know, a lot of, you know, female characters. Some of them include like Sandra McLean, you know, Myra North, you know, Dixie Dugan, Lollapalooza. I'll do, you know, female characters as well. because since I'm doing more of a generalized. So let me see. Is that large enough for you to see, or should I make it a little larger?
Yeah, that's good. Here, I do it like this. That'll give it a little bit more screen space.
Okay, I think I'll make it a little larger, just to make sure everybody can see that.
Okay.
So this is my what you might call my baseline. So we're up to like 300 magnification on my end. So yeah, so let me just make some quick little adjustments here. This is my baseline, and this may be a little too. Okay, I had to admit maybe this is a little too big. I'll go back down to 200. That might work a bit better here. This is my baseline. Okay, this is how here's my basic organizational. Now contrary to the name, this is not my site. There's actually some guy named Mike Reynolds, I believe. Now, originally, I think he had. You see all the different icons up here. DC, Marvel. I think he originally had specific sites for each of these properties, but he has since consolidated them all into this one site. Okay, Mike's Amazing World of Comics. So originally he had this is the DC site, and then he did have like a Marvel site, an Archie site. But I think now if I were to click on those icons, probably just bring me back here. Yeah. Or
no, he takes you to his index of Marvel.
Yeah. So well, no, but they had go back to a couple of let me just oops, that went back a little too far there. Let me kind of show you what I'm talking about here. So you see how the different titles have the different like Marvel's in green, DC's in yellow, Charlton's in some kind of teal or something. You see, you'd have each of those would have their own site, with that color scheme, right? But I think now what's happened is he's just consolidated it all into like one site here. Okay, he's consolidated it all into one site. Now
makes it easier.
Yeah. So which is fine. And you see here, so like here show all publishers on sale date, and all this. And then he even has, and this is like checklist mode, exclude variants, and because we don't need to see like all the different collections variants. But let me just now I go by on sale date, because the way this guy does it is the on sale date is how he establishes the chronology.
Okay.
How the internal comic chronology. So sort alphabetical or sort by publication date. That's how I usually do it. We'll start with January, and we will. Well, yeah. Let me rise this up a bit to where the list. You see 2022 right here.
Right.
So let's go all the way down. And you see that 1933 is where it starts off there.
Yes.
Now we'll just hit filter. So January 1933, nothing.
Nothing.
Right? All right, so let's.
But now you can arrow across months, and
we'll just February 1933, nothing. March of 1933.
We're getting a lot of nothing.
Well, early on. Here's the very first comic. According to this went on sale in April of 1933. This one was called Funnies on Parade from Eastern Color. Eastern Color was the first company. Now, granted, there are sources like GCD that do say that Dell actually came out with an earlier comic, the volume 1 of the Funnies. But apparently, I guess there are no copies of those comic books. They did have the Funnies that we cover now on the Historical Art Volume 2 from Dell. So, here's the information right here. So, Funnies on Parade #1, the comic title, publisher Eastern Color, cover date 1933. So no specific month date, but just a cover date. Approximate on sale date April 1st, 1933. No price. Page count 32. First modern comic book. Now, I think I did, and then, of course, as you know, one of my other sources I use is the public domain site, Comic Book Plus, which I think
Right.
if I was able to find it, now, some of the other sources I use, of course, include the Grand Comic Database, GCD. I do use Read Comics Online and Comic Book Plus for the actual book. Because as part of it, of course, aside from the commentary, aside from like the trivia stuff, of course, we obviously want to give samples of what was being written too, right? Now, granted, that doesn't mean we try to read everything because that would just take forever. But if you want to get a good feel for whatever universe you want to go into, then you need to at least read some samples. So in the notes here, this says that this is the first modern comic book. It was a giveaway. So this is what you might call some kind of experimentation. Now, one of the things I learned early on, of course, with these early comic books, they were anthologies, that they were reprint anthologies. They were simply just grabbed a whole bunch of popular comic strips at the time that were in the newspapers, and they just reprint them, right? So this is 1933. This is the very, in what you might call the modern era of comic books.
Yeah.
This was the very first comic book. Okay.
Was this also the very first comic book retrospective show then?
Huh? When I started. This is this along with probably some of the others that would come, like Eastern Color right here, publisher name, publication year 1933 to 1956. And you see the additional information here. You had, the company names that went through Eastern Color, Famous Funnies Inc., which happened to be their first book. Now we kind of went a little in depth here in terms of this stuff, but let's go back now. Chances are, if I didn't, I don't remember if I found much information on it. If I didn't, more than likely in the early days, because so few books were coming out, I probably did cover like 2 or 3 issues at a time early on. So let's kind of quickly go through some other dates. So May 33.
From April 33 till the very first superhero, there was a lot of comic books that absolutely had no superhero action because the concept didn't really exist yet.
Right. Like, here's the next one, August of 1933. Famous Funnies, A Carnival of Comics, #1, from Eastern Color again. Kind of the same thing. My general impression of these comics this was Eastern Color being the first company to kind of throw the idea out there that, okay, a lot of people like reading their Sunday funnies, right? Their Sunday comics. Getting the newspaper every Sunday and then going to the comic section and reading, again, and you have to remember the time period too. This was during the Great Depression. This was a time when people needed something to uplift them. Part of the reason for the superhero concept wasn't here yet was probably because of the fact people at the very least needed more of an uplifting experience. Not necessarily they weren't ready for a superhero to come in and try to save them from their misery yet. They just needed something to just lift their spirits, right? So a lot of the newspaper reprints they would reprint here would be more humor oriented. They'd be more like comedy kind of stuff,
right?
Slice of life comedy.
And they had to they were owned by newspaper companies as well,
right?
And what they had to do is it was expensive to start the press back up again if you let it stop. So it was more economical to keep the presses running, and to do that you had to have things coming off of it. So they invented this idea of reprinting the comics. So
that's in the early days. That's where we get companies like King Feature Syndicate, like United Feature Syndicate. Now, the King Feature Syndicate actually they didn't actually start creating their own comic books till much later, but their characters were being published by David McKay Publications, as you know. Those are the books that, for whatever reason, I can't find, and we can't read those. Those are the ones with like Popeye and Phantom and all that. But, you know, Famous Funnies again here, Carnival Comics #1, Eastern Color. Again, this was another like one shot that they did. It kind of like as kind of an experiment kind of thing. It's an experimental thing at this point. They were like throwing out, see, okay, how sales look. Does this look like it's something that could sell? You know, so you know, so let's see how long we go until we hit the next. And I'll give you a little bit of a cheat here, as it were. We don't start seeing anybody other than Eastern Color until like 1935, but we'll just kind of.
So they had a monopoly on the market then until somebody figured this out.
Yeah, until DC came along in 35. So 2 months later, in October of 1933, here, Century of Comics #1, and again these early and even into, I would say up through. Maybe up to late 36 or early, and I'll show you here as we go through this, up to late 36 into early 37. Most of the anthologies are what I would call hodgepodge anthologies, okay? Meaning that they didn't have a specific thing. They had a little bit of everything in them.
Yeah.
You had your humor strip. You had your adventure strip. You had your sci-fi strips. You had a little bit of everything. You didn't. There was never any book that was devoted. It wasn't until like maybe at the earliest late 36, you know, maybe into early 36. It could have even been earlier in 36. I think about it. I think Centaur did, but we'll see that. I'll try to get through this part a little bit quicker because I know we've only got a time here. But you know, you got Century of Comics here. So just you know, and again, this is part of the whole process. So early on, of course, I didn't have to make any big decisions yet because
that's what I was going to say. There wasn't that many to pick from, so you just took what was there. But
and sometimes I could do multiple months at a time to give samples because, you know, again, not a whole lot. So now we're into 1934. I'm just going to flash through until we hit the next one. You know, as soon as I can find my cursor, of course.
Oh, I hate when that happens. But, you know, eventually you got to the point where there were too many to do for a single show, and you had to start making choices about what you were going to include and what you were going to skip over. And I'm guessing that there's, you know, some personal preference involved in that because, you know, some of these books spoke to you in a certain way, and you're like, yeah, I'm liking these characters, and these characters didn't, and they didn't really go anywhere, so it won't really hurt if we don't cover them here.
Okay, so here's the first comic book available for sale to the general public in a non-promotional capacity. This is Famous Funny Series 1, in parentheses there, #1, because my guess is they didn't have a. Now this is basically the first regular comic book.
Yeah, the others were you got them with something else.
It was a promotional thing. It was more of a promotional thing. It was kind of an experiment. So here, like Eastern Color, cover date May of 1934, approximate on sale date March. As we talked before about this stuff, the cover date, usually the cover date and the on sale date are about a month to 2 months apart from each other.
Yeah, so the cover date was almost like an expiration date. That's when it was like, okay, send it back on this day.
Yeah. Okay. So cover price 10 cents, 64 pages. Of course, these are some pretty big books at this point in time. Okay. I think this did eventually become a regular series as Famous Funnies. So let's see. So then April of 1934 is, you know, and I'm just 35. I have and here's here. Okay, so here's the actual. Okay, so Famous Funnies. This is Famous Funnies #1. Now it was under Eastern Color, but at the time they were calling themselves the Eastern Color printing company. And I think Eastern Color was a printer. They weren't a newspaper; they were a printer. So, cover date July of 1934, approximate on sale date, and like again, and you see here, look at all these. All these are comic strip reprints, right? You probably recognize some of those names.
A few of them, but
yeah,
a
Mud and
lot
Jeff.
of them have been lost to history.
Yeah. Well, I think two of them that I think a lot of people would know might be Mutt and Jeff and Ben Webster. But
well, definitely Mutt and Jeff. They lasted a long time.
Yeah, but I want to come here for a moment. So Toonsville, you had 5 pages here, 4 pages there. You know, a lot of these were like usually what they did, they put a month up at a time. 4 strips printed on non-consecutive pages. Basically, just to give you an idea of what, so, and I don't think I need to go through every single one of them, but you basically get the idea here on this, how a lot of these were put together and stuff like that, right?
Right.
Yeah. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. You had 14 features here. 14 features, probably on average, maybe about 3 to 4 pages, right?
From what I've seen, yeah. 6 pages would be a big story.
Yeah. So my guess is that's probably to cover like a month's worth of, because again, these are as noted there, comic strip reprints, right? So.
So when you started doing this, I'm going to break away from the actual history here, because this is what your channel's supposed to do. We're not going to do it all here.
I know, but I'm just trying to give you some idea here. But yeah, you're right. We should probably move on a little bit here.
But at some point, this became, a regular piece of your channel every Friday now, and it's.
Well, it was when I first introduced it. It was always, when I first introduced, when I decided to do the historical comic, it became a regular part of the channel right then and there. It was basically because originally what I had wanted to do on Fridays was to do a panel show where I'd bring in different, some of the people I knew, because remember when I first got into this, even before I even created the mic stand, I got into it because of the Vic Mignogna situation, and I got, was of course hanging around with like Tug and Yellow Flash and all those guys, and I wanted to have them come on to my, bring them on, in a kind of like what we do with the co-hosting thing, where it bring in different people on, just have a panel discussion, kind of like what Flash does with his Flashcast and stuff, just talk about it and just focus it on niche. Of course, that never happened because those guys are just way too big, and of course, I'm just, I'm only 167 subscribers, so it's not like they'd have the time to do that with me. But
at one point they only had 167 subscribers, so
yeah. But because as you know from when I come on your channel, when I come on to your open mic, I love to get into these conversations about niche and all that. And I love to talk about this stuff, whether it's present day or even history, right? So when I, since the whole panel idea was not working out, the only guest that I had on the panel was Mr. Hop and Crumbion. They came on a couple times for me when I scheduled them. The KitchenerCon people.
Yeah.
They were the only ones who actually came on, for a panel discussion. And plus, some of my regular viewers like Batgoat and all that at the time. So realizing that probably was not going to work out, I couldn't get any of the people that I knew. I decided to start doing a historical, when after the response to when I did the Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster feature during the week, I just decided, okay, I'll make Fridays a historical comic book, because I knew if especially with the way I was doing it, had plenty of, in essence, I had plenty of content to last me for years, if
Absolutely.
not theoretically for the rest of my life. You know, especially with the very way I do it here. You know, but yeah, again, I'm gonna go a little forward here. I'm gonna try to flash through this because obviously we don't need this.
Well, I know you're a numbers guy too, because you pay attention to how the traffic is doing on every episode of your show to get trends and stuff. Have you noticed how the retrospective show compares to the niche news broadcast? Is it just as attended or better attended?
I would say it's probably slightly better attended. You know, I still have trouble getting people to stick around and hang out, and it seems like at times because I still get the peaks of 5 and 6 at times, but first off, I still don't seem to be able to get anybody to be there right from the beginning and stick around till the very end, or at least I'm not thinking, because I know you've told me before, and I know others have told me before that they are there, they're just not chatting, and therefore, and because of how YouTube is, especially if you're under 10 viewers, let's say, that seems to be the general consensus. Like, if you're under 10 viewers, unless people are constantly talking or chatting, they don't count it. You might have 7 people watching, but unless those 7 people are constantly saying stuff and constantly interacting, YouTube won't count it. It'll like slide back down to like 1 or 0. And the thing is, it gets me with 0 because it's like, I'm there.
Yeah.
I have the YouTube screen on. I should be being counted as a viewer. So I've had to work my way a little way around that, make sure that I'm still counted as well. But, I do everything I can to tell them, okay, I'm probably one of the few people. I mean, I know you are too, but you look at like some of the bigger, YouTubers like Nick Rekieta, like Yellow Flash, like, they may plan on having, they may, like Yellow Flash, he may say he's going to be on at 7:15. My time, 10:15 his or whatever. But sometimes they don't necessarily start till like 5 minutes later than they initially were. Now they may say it's like publishing, producing stuff, whatever. But that 6 o'clock hits, 6 o'clock my time, 9. I think it'd be 8 o'clock your time. I'm on.
Yes, you're on at the top of the hour.
I'm on right at the top of the hour. I even go as far as to, like, when hit the go live button on my thing 5 seconds before to make, because I know sometimes it does take a little while for you go live on StreamYard, but it doesn't necessarily automatically start on YouTube for like a few moments there. So I usually, and it was actually Action Toys who pointed that out to me. Now, going back to something we were talking about earlier, this is what I was waiting to get to. This right here, because now, because as we said, up to this point, Eastern Color was the only publisher that was publishing regularly, right? But look what happened in January of 1935.
There's new fun.
New fun, right? The very first. Now
suddenly there was competition.
Right. First DC comic, 10x15, black and white. This, and you had Jack, and at this point, of course, DC, the big comic magazine. Now, that's one of the other things that you have to understand too. They were not calling them comic books back then. The term they were using were comic magazines.
Yes, because it was a magazine. It had advertisements. It just happened to carry stories in it that were drawn with pictures.
Well, and as I have often pointed out too before, many of the Golden Age comics were more akin to what we grew up with highlights, right? Because they didn't just have advertisements; and they would have some text stories too. They'd usually have 1 or 2 text stories a book. They'd also have, a lot of these comics would also have like either little action, little like activity pages like crossword puzzles or snip and snipe stuff, or
Right.
and they'd also have little features that were more like historical features, like or something like historical features, or like you'll never forget. Even Ripley got a feature in one of these books too. But now look at the titles there. Jack Woods, which was a Western. First Pancho Villa, Part 1. Okay. Sandra of the Secret Service, the Gavonia Affair, Part 1. This new fun. Okay. Not only was this the first time you saw competition, but here's another little tidbit. Look at everything in parentheses here. Versus Pancho Villa, Part 1. The Gavonia Affair, Part 1. No title. Feng Gao of China, Part 1. No title. The Bedouins, Part 1. No title. Nope, he didn't get his man. Now, from what we saw previously, to now, what could you infer from this?
They were serializing.
Well, that's one thing, but
they were making a comeback.
Okay. Famous Funnies was going with reprints, right? Comic strip reprints. What do you think these are? Do you think these are reprints, or are they something else?
I wouldn't know. I'm sure somebody of the time would say, I don't know any of these characters. This is all brand new.
Yes, and what would that make if these are all new characters? What type of content would that be then?
I don't know. I don't know where you're leading me.
Original content.
Okay, there you go. Yeah.
I figured you would have been able to do that, but I guess I had to.
I'm not that smart, man.
If you think about it, this not only was the first company to compete to bring in the idea of competition, this was the first. DC was the actual first company to produce original content.
Yeah. And Oswald the Rabbit, if it's the Oswald the Rabbit I'm thinking it is, that was a Walt Disney creation.
Mm-hmm.
Before there was a Walt Disney Company.
Yeah, and yeah. So, and with that though, and of course with Oswald the Rabbit, it also brought forth one of the other things that would become popular in the early days and even still be around today, the idea of licensing out projects, licensing out IPs to make comic book adaptations for.
Right.
And again, as I said, this is kind of a hodgepodge. Jack Woods was a Western. Sandra of the Secret Service, that was kind of a spy type of thing. Barry O'Neill was, I would call him like a non-costume version of Batman or Superman. Or not Superman, but Batman or like Sandman or something. Barry O'Neill was similar to Tex Thompson in that he was what I would call a Playboy adventurer. Now, a Playboy adventure, why I call them that, these are the guys who are rich. They kind of come from money in some way. Now, granted, it wasn't as played up here because it was a serial style storytelling here. But Barry O'Neill, O'Neill was one of those types, much like Tex Thompson, who was kind of more wealthy. He was kind of more affluent. So he basically had the time to do this. And you'd find him being able to help the police or whatever. He wasn't a cop. He wasn't like a flyby. He wasn't dressing up in costume or anything like that. He was just a normal guy who just happened to help solve cases. He's just some Joe Schmo off the street, and he could do that because
a lot of them were like that. I mean, they a lot of these early comic titles, they weren't like, Wonder Man, Superman. It was like,
right.
Barry O'Neill. It's just a guy.
yeah, as you know, Superman was really the thing that blew the door wide open there. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and again, you have Ivanhoe, which was based on the book. Wayne Brady, which was an aviator type. Oswald the Rabbit, you could say, was probably, some of these were kind of more slice life. Like I think Oswald the Rabbit was, Judge Perkins, local. Some of them were like a lot of these Scrub Hardy. You can tell by the Captain Eric. You could tell these were more. You had some humor in there. You had some action adventure. You 2023 Super Police, sci-fi one. So you had a little. So if you notice by the titles there, you had a little bit of everything in there.
Yes, we did.
It was, as I would call them, it was a hodgepodge type. Hodgepodge type. Now we can still keep talking. You can ask more questions. I'm just gonna keep flashing through here until we get to another major point in history.
We're coming up at the bottom of the hour here, or at the top of the next hour. So what I want to do is I want to jump all the way forward to this week, because as this airs, when it finishes, it is time to jump over to the mic stand for this Friday's version of the historical retrospective for comics. So when people leave here and when they hit the link below the video to go over to your channel, what are they going to see this week?
Okay, so this week we're going to, let me just go ahead and do this real quick, and I'll jump over to the actual, so June of 19th. So we're going to go, so this week we're going to start, so just looking at June here, from June 1935, look at how many comics have, I'm going to flash through these real quick as soon as I can find the cursor, until we get to June 1939, because June 1939 is where we're going to be. But look at how many, as you can just tell just by...
A lot to pick from.
Right, as we're starting to see that. Now, I wasn't going to go through all of these, obviously. I was just going to go through, but June 1939 is going to be our... for the next 6 weeks. Okay, so here we are. So for the next 6 weeks, starting with this week, we're going to be covering June of 1930, and these are some of the titles. We got the companies that we're going to be covering, of course, through Dell, DC, as you can see there, United Features, David McKay, Centaur, Dell, United Feature, Eastern Color, and even up to this point, it's kind of funny, after 4 years, they started out as the only comic, and at this point, they're still only publishing, at this point, as of June of 1939, they're still only publishing one title. Whereas a lot of the companies that come after them have already started doing multiple titles.
Right.
So
I'm seeing some familiar ones there too. I'm seeing, I'm seeing Detective. I'm seeing Action.
Yeah, Dell, Fox Feature Syndicate, Quality, Centaur. The only one that's not here that is, well, actually, I'm sorry, Fiction House as well. Now Fiction House at this point, during a portion of 39, instead of coming out every month, they were coming out every other month for a while there. Okay, so for the next 6 weeks, we'll be covering June of 1939. Now, for this week coming up, for the week that we are going, and I'll also go through some of the other weeks as well, but not as in depth. But I'll go into depth a little bit on what we're going to be covering this week as soon as I can once again find my cursor.
Mouse keeps disappearing. Need a cat.
Well, it's finding the arrow on the screen here.
Sometimes I have to click and pray because I'm like, I'm going to click to see the mouse cursor light up. I hope it's not on top of something.
Well, that's what I'm doing. All right, I've just found it now. Okay. All right. So now you say, I mean, look, now this goes about 8 goes about 8. So about like eight books a line here usually, or a full line. So that's just 1, 2, 3, 4 full lines. 4 full lines.
32 books.
32 books altogether that were published in June of 1939. Now these are based on sale dates because I told you.
That's the most sensible way to record them.
Yeah. So this week when we go on when we this Friday show, the one that people will be watching after this, we're going to be covering DC. Okay, so here are all the DC. So you have Movie Comics number 4, Action Comics. Now this is one. I don't know if this is because it was a 5-month thing or whatever, 5-week thing, but you have Action Comics number 14 and 15 during this month. And then you have More Fun number 45, Detectives number 29, Adventure number 40, All American number 5. So, but just to kind of, so now this is one of the things I was telling you about too, because so this week, right, Action Comics number 14, so DC Comics Detective Comics, that one went on sale. On sale date was June 2nd, 1939. June 2nd, 1939. And then I'm just going to go to Action Comics number this one. That one went on sale, approximate on sale date, June 29th, 1939.
Yeah. Definitely.
That was the August cover date. The other one was, I believe, a July cover date. That was, but I just wanted to show that, just to show the two different dates there. Now
and hey, that's our good friend Fred B. Gardenier doing the cover on that.
Yeah,
we've seen before, and I'm seeing that this is the key issue that people are going to be watching your guests read this weekend, because this is a first appearance time for the DC universe.
Well, yeah, and yeah, I was going to get into that, but because I know specifically you were asking me how I made my choices, and we'll talk a bit about so one of the factors is first bit. Now, granted, this is not the Ultra Humanites first; it was a previous issue. But as I told you, so you have Zatara on the cover, you have Superman in the background there. There's another one of those where even though Superman's not featured on the cover, he's a part of the cover. But
yeah.
But look at this point. So this is more now. One of the other points I wanted to make too here. This is This is more of a themed anthology. So it's Detective Comics, right? So you have Action Comics. So you don't have as many stories now. You have what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You have 7 features that are averaging about 7 to 8 pages. And one of the other things of note to take note of this too, RJ.
Yeah.
The headline feature is always by this point the headline feature is always the first story here, and the primary backup feature or the secondary feature is the last story. And usually everything in between, sometimes you have you see Tex Thompson there. He'd be considered the third main character there. He's more they're usually somehow spread about the book. But you have Superman, who is a superhero. Pep Morgan, who is more of a sports hero type. You have Marco Polo, the historical adventure type. Clip Carson was, I think, a newspaper reporter or something like that. Tex Thompson was, as I told you before, was at this point in his career before he donned the costume and all that, and before or all that. At this point, Tex Thompson was a Playboy adventurer. Chuck Dawson's a Western, and then Zatara is the magician. So again, you had the variety here, but with these more, with the more specific type anthologies like this.
Yeah, there's no humor strips interspersed in between here. They're all going to be like the title says,
and the title is much longer now. As I told you before in some of our other conversations, Okay, Superman meets the Ultra Humanite. Actually, Ultra Humanite made his first appearance in 13, which I covered the last time I hit DC. Okay, so
Did he make an appearance in a Superman story, or was it a different story?
He did. So
okay,
towards the end of the story, so you see here Superman, last appearance Superman 1. That was a text story at the end of Superman 1. Action Comics 15 was his next one. George Taylor, New York World's Fair. Ultra Humanite, last appearance, number 13. Next appearance, number 17. Now, as I told you before, too, this is part of an arc I'm doing as part of my coverage. Ultra Humanite was, of course, the first supervillain, first regular rogue that Superman encountered.
Right.
From Action Comics number 13 through 21, through those 9 issues, Ultra Humanite appeared in 6 of those 9. So we will like for this month we'll be this is one of the stories we'll be covering. Okay.
He was a big deal.
Yeah, and let me go back one more to point out one more thing too with that as well, real quick here. Now, in a 2-hour period, I figure I can usually read about 30 pages of content.
Right.
Okay, that's about what I figured. So this story being the lead feature, and most of the headline features and a lot of the secondary features will be about 12 to 13 pages. You see right there, 13 pages. There'll be about 12 to 13 pages of content right there.
Much longer stories now.
Right. Okay, so going back now, the next story I'd be covering, and I'll explain my reason. Okay. We'll go to now. I'm still making some final determination, but I'm now. Most of the time, I will not do 2 headliners in the same week because it'd end up taking a huge chunk of the time, and obviously I want to vary it up. But this one I have to because again the Ultra Humanite thing, but also this is a first appearance issue right here. Batman meets Dr. Death.
Right.
This starts a two issue arc where Batman meets his first kind of themed villain, Dr. Death, Paul Helfern. Right, this guy was, I think, an extortionist, I believe. One of the other things they say here in the comic, this is the first time Batman utilizes his utility belt with choking gas. But in 29 and 30, that was Batman dealing with Dr. Death. So this one, now one other story I'm still finalizing. I may do the Crimson Avenger story as well here. Now, okay, let me go back to so Gardner. Now, according to this, Gardner Fox is the writer. Bob Kane was the artist on here, according to this source. 10 pages, right? The first Batman story was like 6 pages when it came out in 27. Now we're up to 29, and he's up to 10 pages. So obviously, Batman was picking up steam here pretty early on, pretty quick too, as you did notice. 10 pages right there. So that's 23 pages right there. Now, the Crimson Avenger story I may do because Crimson Avenger, this is his last appearance for 8. He takes an 8 issue. I may do this one. I may not. This one went on sale June. Of course, the book went on sale June 13th in 1939. Jim G. Chambers. Okay, so the note's not here, but this is Crimson Avenger's last appearance for 8 issues. I think what ends up happening is another writer takes over from what I read on DC Database. But okay. I may do this one. I may, because originally, but I may do this one. I may not. There's one possible, but let's see. That one's. I keep going back and forth. 6 pages there. Okay.
So people tuning in this Friday tonight, maybe in for up to 3 different superhero stories from the DC universe?
Oh, they're definitely going to have 3 different ones, because it may even be as many as 4. Now, depending upon how you feel about certain characters and what that could even be as many as 5. You know,
Depending on how much time you got and what the interaction with the co-host and audience is. Yeah.
Right. Now, the other story, and this is why I say guaranteed 3 superheroes, because we are going to also do the Sandman story here. And this one has some significance as well, because the Tarantula Strikes. Now, this is one that you and I even talked about before, because you got Gardner Fox apparently doing the writing here, Burt Chrisman doing the art. Now, out here, Sandman, Wesley Dodds, last name. Okay, first appearance, see comment below, and we'll see that. Last appearance in Secret Origins #7, last appearance in New York World's Fair Comics. And here's something that we talked about before. I've talked about with you before about. This is the second published appearance of the Sandman. His first appearance was in the 10th story of New York World's Fair Comics #1. Now, New York World's Fair Comics is another type of comic, that we'll get into later, on another show probably or whatever. But clearly, the events of that story take place sometime after the events of this one. Considerably, the story in this issue was intended to be his first. So basically, what they're saying is this story was technically Sandman's first chronological appearance.
Yeah, and that's happened a lot, in publishing. It's like this is supposed to go out on this day, but something happened, and the next one went out instead. So now that one became the real first appearance to people, but this is his first story in the chronology of the DC universe, which is not necessarily the chronology of publishing world.
Right. Well, and again, I do emphasize a lot with chronology, but since we are running short, I'm going to try to quicken this up a little bit here. So 6 pages there. So we will definitely have at least three superheroes, and then depending upon what I ultimately decide. Now, originally, one of the things I was originally going to do, but I may be changing my mind on this, All-American Comics #5. Okay. Now, originally, I was going to finish up with 2 stories from here, Hop Harrigan and Squibbly. Now, the reason, of course, I'm covering Hop Harrigan, because in later years, in the 80s, now here they're doing comic strip reprints too. So this one's a little bit more, but Hop Harrigan and Squibbly are original. Those are 2 original stories, obviously. Now, Hop Harrigan, the reason I do Hop Harrigan is because in later years they did retcon him to being part of the All-Star Squadron. He was one of the guys who was part of the All-Star Squadron. He's a pilot one. Now, he's one that I'm still definitely... now, he's an aviator hero. So, if you're going to base being a superhero as being part of the All-Star Squadron, then you could argue that some people may say you could argue he's a superhero. Even though he doesn't have any powers. He is a hero, definitely. He's an aviator hero. Now, this one we're going to do. This one we're going to do regardless. This marks the first appearance of Jerry Jolty, who ends up being... Now, this is one of those stories that starts out with him thinking Jerry's a boy, but turns out that she's a girl. And she would eventually become his love interest. So, again, first appearance there. So, this story we're definitely going to get. Now, originally, I was also going to cover the Squibbly story, but I may not cover the Squibbly story in here in favor of the Crimson Avenger, noting the fact that that'd be his last appearance for like 8 issues. Issue 29 is the Crimson Avenger's last appearance for 8. He takes an 8-issue hiatus and comes back in issue 37. Squibbly
All right.
here by Sheldon Meyer. Now, Squibbly I cover a lot because Squibbly, of course, is the comic that eventually introduced us to the Golden Age Red Tornado.
Ma Hunkel. Yeah.
Ma Hunkel. And Ma Hunkel was already introduced in issue 3. So, so I'd still cover him while I'm still at this point. But so now with all that, so the stories that I am going to absolutely cover, of course, Superman, Batman, Sandman, and Hop Harrigan.
All right.
And I'm still deciding. I may end up doing Crimson Avenger because I just originally I was going to do Scribbly, do the 2 because both of those work because they're only 4 pages each. So even though I'd be up in the high 30s at that point, we might be running up until like 2.5 hours because you got 13 pages in Superman, 10 in Batman, 6 for Sandman, 4 for Hop Harrigan. You got 6 for Crimson Avenger and 4 for Squibbly. So so now let's see how much where are we at on time?
That's a full show with all those characters in it. So now is the time to make sure that the link below here is within the viewing window of your monitor and click on it to get over to the mic stand so that you can find out what it is that really happens that we've been talking about here. We've talked about what the show does, but there's nothing quite like experiencing the show and being in the audience and just seeing these old Golden Age comics get read out loud again.
The one thing I didn't get to that I was also think is important is the decision-making process. You know, that's the part that I think is key here because it's like with all those different superhero characters, and it's going to get even more complicated as time goes on. What are some of the factors that go into my decision-making process? That's something I think you wanted to know, right? Right? That's what I think.
Yeah, because I figure you just picked your favorites.
Yeah. Okay. So obviously, a lot of the main focus will be on like the books that we will cover more like almost on a monthly basis. You know, the basic information are the superhero stuff because that's what a lot of people want to know. Doesn't mean we're not going to cover humor comics. We're not going to cover because there were a bunch of different genres going on, particularly in the Golden Age. You had your romance comics, you had your sci-fi comics, and you had your more generic stuff. We will cover sporadically. That's where the milestone issue that I explained on some of my previous talks with you before, where through the first 30. I'm not going to go through all that again. You've heard me say that. That's where the milestone issue comes into the more generic stuff. When we're covering more of the continuity stuff, like the superhero stuff and the stuff that's connected to the superheroes, right? Stuff that we are going to be covering more like on a monthly basis. Some of the factors that I do when I'm picking stories out will include obviously first issue, first appearance, first use of a superpower or paraphernalia. Those also specific story arcs, like for the example with the Ultra Humanite one, where you have over a 9-issue period. Obviously, ones where regular rogues or themed villains are used, those are more likely going to be covered. Like the more generic stuff, the more stuff like where the superheroes are just dealing with gangsters. Even though there are some stories like Sandman, like Batman, where a lot of those are, particularly more in the early on ones. The more generic stuff is going to be more sporadic. But the ones where we're dealing with a specific supervillain or there's a specific character that's featured, those ones we will be covering more often. Those will be ones we'll be covering because obviously the idea is to get them more immersed into the universe, right? The more mundane stuff, that's not gonna, once in a while that's cool, but the more generic mundane stuff, that's cool for once in a while. but so like obviously first specific stories, story arcs,
Yeah, you don't want to start an arc and then not get back to it on another show.
right.
You don't leave any cliffhangers out there.
Right. So I mean, that goes into my thought process in terms of how I put the show together. I mean, it's like now DC right now is the only up to this point, up to June, is the only company up through May that had where I had to do that. Starting in June, however, 2 companies will be adding books that I'll be covering regularly: Fox Feature Publications and Quality. Fox adds Mystery Men, which, so with the Fox, we were covering Wonder Comic. Right now, The Flame is the main hero there.
Right.
And, after the whole Wonder Man debacle and all that, I'm sure. And with Mystery Men, among the heroes that are introduced include Green Mask, Zanzibar the Magician, and, drum roll please, Blue Beetle. Blue Beetle will be making his first appearance in
Dan Garrett, the police officer.
His first appearance in Mystery Man Comics, issue number 1, on sale date June 39. And then Quality, they would introduce Smash Comics, where they would move Black X from feature funnies to Smash Comics, and the hero introduced there was Invisible Hood, one of the characters DC picked up from Quality when they went bankrupt, and also feature funnies to help fill out some of the titles they lost to Smash. You'll have one of the first comic book appearances of Charlie Chan.
Oh, okay.
That's some stuff to look forward to in the later, as I said, this is some of the stuff to look forward to as we're over the next 6 weeks as we're covering. Now, when you're with me on the 28th, we'll be looking at David McKay publications and Eastern Color. Now, sometimes in cases like with David McKay, when we can't find the books themselves or we can only do the summary work, I will put them together with another company, just to keep the coverage going. And of course, Eastern Color will be covering us, Eastern Color, because the 60th issue of Famous Funnies will hit in June as well. So, but just some stuff to look forward to. But basically that's all and RJ, I'd suggest, because we're going on an hour and a half now, so we might want to start this at 4:30.
I'm already wondering when I'm going to have to kick this one off now because we've gone way too long. Okay, so folks, if you want to not miss out on this, the thing to do is click now. Get over to the mic stand and get on while the retrospective is just kicking off. Then sit back, have some popcorn and read along with the comics. And thanks for watching. While you were here, we just hope you had a blast. Good night.
Your favorite podcast, it's Critical Blast.
All right, and